Hello, crafty friends. This is Anya Yunrol with Ink, Paper, Scissors. Welcome back to another episode of Use Your Scraps. Before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss a video. In today's episode, I'm showing you 3 different techniques to use pattern paper and paper scraps while making 8 cards. This technique is great for beginners and advanced card makers alike. The best part, you don't need any specialty dies to create these background panels, just a trimmer and scissors. We'll go through them in the following order. First, I'll show you how to create a few A2 panels using strips on your card base. Then we'll move on to using small and even tiny pieces of paper. Finally, we'll use larger pieces to create stunning designs. Before each technique, I'll show you the finished card so you know exactly what we're creating. I've also included all the products used in today's video in the description below if you'd like to take a closer look. Plus, I have more details and photos of the cards on my website, where you can also subscribe to be notified whenever I post a new video. It's that time, let's get crafty. I'm starting out by just cutting strips of various pattern papers. I'm cutting them to be about 1/4 of an inch wide. I am not too worried about cutting them exact, I just want them to be about the same. Once my strips are cut, I cut tails into one side of the strip. I am doing this to add interest. Once all my strips have tails, I'm taking my Stampin' Up! Dots and adding them to the beginning of my strip and about an inch into it. You could also use a tape runner here. This is so my strips will automatically stick as I lay them down on my A2 card base. For this design, I start laying my strips at an angle on the left side of my cardstock. I start about 1/4 of an inch from the bottom and work my way up. I'm not trying to align my strips at the same depth. I want to create a wavy pattern so that they look random and organic. The only thing I pay attention to here is that the order that I lay my strips do not clash with one another. I try to lay busy patterns next to calm or subtle patterns, or dark patterns next to lighter ones rather than all the dark ones together. Between laying my strips in an organic way and the patterns, it gives the card a lot of texture and interest. Now let's talk about paper strips. Strips are one of my favorite ways to use scraps because you can mix and match patterns and create really unique backgrounds. There's so much that you can do with paper strips. I am working on a video for you that is all about paper strips, since there's so much that you can do with strips. I'm hoping to have it done in the near future. Let me know in the comments if this is something you'd like to see. And talking about comments, I want to express a huge thank you to everyone who has been leaving comments and subscribing. Your support and encouragement mean the world to me, and it truly motivates me to bring you the best content I can. I also heard your requests. In my last episode, I used the Leaf Mixed Die set by Altenew, and many of you asked me to create more cards with it. I want you to know that I've heard you, and I'm working on bringing you more content using those dies very soon. Once I've arranged my strips on the left side, I add glue to the remainder of my strips to make sure that they're well secured on my card panel. Then I take my trimmer and cut along the edge of my A2 panel. Then I decide to repeat my process on the right side of my A2 panel. I start by cutting a few more strips and then using my scissors to cut tails into one end of my strips. Then I start adding Stampin' Up! Dots to my strips again, and laying my pattern paper strips in the same order as on the left side, making sure they start at the same height of my A2 panel as on the left side. Once my background is complete, I move on to the next background. Here I'm using the remainder of my strips, but this time I'm cutting the end of the strip at an angle. I try to keep the angle on each strip similar and going in the same direction. Then I start adhering the strips again in an uneven and organic way across the bottom of my A2 panel, creating a wave. Then I cut along the edge with my Holtz Scissors, and my second background is finished. Moving on to my third background, I'm again using strips that I cut 1/4 of an inch wide. I am again cutting the ends at an angle, and I start laying my strips across the bottom, trying to keep about the same height on each strip. I am again paying attention that I don't overwhelm my panel with uneven colors or too much busy patterns. So I'm laying my strips in an order so they balance each other out. Just as before, once all my strips are adhered, I cut the ends off and my last background is finished. Then I start working on the embellishments for my cards. I am die cutting the Simon Says Stamp CZ Design Happy Birthday die and the Concord 9th Just Saying dies several times out of white cardstock. I am even diving into my leftover die cuts. I am die cutting several sentiments with multiple layers of white cardstock. I've decided that the top layer will be teal glitter cardstock and champagne glitter cardstock by Memory Box. Again, details which products I use on which card are on my blog. Then I'm taking the shadow dies of my sentiments and die cutting them out of vellum. I'm also die cutting the Mosaic Beech leaf dies from Tailored Expressions out of glitter cardstock and a pale green cardstock. Then I'm taking my Gina K blue ink blending brush and the color Something Borrowed by Catherine Pooler, and I'm ink blending the ends of my leaves on my Altenew Sticky Mat. I love how the blue looks on the light green color. Then I'm using the inlay technique on one set of my leaves. I have a video on my channel talking about this in detail. I will link it in the description below for you. Basically, I'm holding an outline in white cardstock over my leaf while adding glue in the empty spaces and adding my glitter cardstock pieces in those empty spaces. I do this to all 3 of my leaves. And I love how the leaves turned out. Then it's time to start assembling my cards. These leaves will add contrast to my cards and will look beautiful. I am using the small cart Big Hugs stamp set by Honeybee Stamps to stamp my happy birthday sentiment on my last card. I wanted something small and stacked, so it would still give me plenty of white balance on my card to keep the card simple and clean. This is a fantastic technique to use when you have lots of different scraps from past projects that you don't want to waste. Next up, a paper mosaic background. This is ideal for those itty-bitty scraps that seem too small to use but are too pretty to throw away. You will recognize some of my scraps from the last video as they have the shape of leaves. This technique is great for anyone that loves puzzles. If you love puzzles, I encourage you to try this technique as this is very relatable. You try to make all the pieces fit together. I recommend cutting scraps into random geometric shapes and just starting to arrange them like a mosaic, adhering them to a card base or metallic piece of paper. I'm using metallic cardstock to add shine and interest to my card, which also makes the mosaic look intentional and elegant. I recommend sticking with straight lines when cutting your scraps, as it would be too difficult to match the shape of a curve or circle when looking for the next piece to adhere. I am cutting the pieces to the size that I need them to be and also try to make sure that I'm not using the same pattern paper next to each other. I created 3 of these backgrounds because this technique is addicting and so relaxing. I really recommend you give it a try. For my first card, I'm die cutting the leafy heart die from Memory Box several times out of white cardstock, and then stacking it for dimension. Then I'm taking a black sentiment strip from my sentiment strip collection, which is from Tailored Expressions Simple Strips collection, called Friendship. The sentiment has been heat embossed with Gina K embossing powder. For my second card, I'm using some vellum and my Lawn Fawn large cross-stitched rectangle stackable dies with the second largest rectangle to cut out of my vellum. Then I'm die cutting the giant Thanks So Much from Lawn Fawn several times out of white cardstock and once out of teal glitter cardstock, also by Memory Box. This color is from the Holiday Glitter Pad. This is the best glitter cardstock that I have found for die cutting. I am adhering my large sentiment pieces together for stacked dimension, and when I'm done, I adhere the large sentiment to my vellum. Then I'm tracing glue behind my die cut layer, so you won't be able to see where the vellum is adhered to my A2 panel. I'm adding a few clear iridescent gems by Pinkfresh Studio and my card is finished. For my third card, I'm using the Always Delightful stamp by Gina K Designs. I've decided that the largest flower should be my focal point on my card, so I'm stamping it with Flirty Fuchsia by Catherine Pooler in my mini Misti. Then I'm using Lime Ricky ink by Catherine Pooler for the leaves, Over Coffee for the sprigs, and Seafoam for the other greenery. Then I'm die cutting the Love You Posh script sentiment by Memory Box out of white cardstock and champagne cardstock, which is also by Memory Box and the same holiday glitter pad I mentioned earlier. Then I'm adhering the layers together for stacked dimension. This is such a fun technique because no two backgrounds will ever look the same. Plus, it's a fantastic way to create one-of-a-kind, high-impact designs with just scraps. The final technique is one of my favorites because it's super quick, easy, and gives you clean and simple cards. I'm working with large pattern paper pieces. This technique is perfect if you have a full A2 panel of pattern paper or slightly smaller. You could also use solid cardstock pieces here, but I wanted to add interest instead of just using a plain background. This is also a great technique if you want to use your background stamps. I am cutting my white A2 panel down to 3 3/4 inches by 5 inches. My first piece of pattern paper is about 3 1/4 inches by 5 inches. I start by aligning it onto my white panel to see how I want it to sit so I can still add a sentiment and leave some white space. I want my pattern paper to have a diagonal shape to create a more dynamic look. You can also use basic rectangles, but I love how angled cuts add movement to the design. Once I've aligned my paper, I cut the leftover pieces away with my scissors. Then I cut some foam adhesive to the size of my pattern paper so I can pop it up and give it dimension. Then I adhere to my panel. I then take some blue cardstock and cut it down to 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. I use this as my shadow layer and adhere it to my card base. Then I take my mini Misti and my clearly besotted Laugh Out Loud Belated stamp set and align my sentiment directly under my pattern paper. I stamp it with VersaFine Clear Nocturne ink and my card is complete. For the last and final card, I repeat the process from the first card. I align a piece of blue pattern paper to an A2 panel that measures 4 1/4 inches by 5 1/2 inches. I use a pencil to mark on the back of my pattern paper to mark where I have to trim the paper. I use my Holtz Trimmer to trim my pattern. Then I pull out my Gina K Luck and Love stamp set, which is unfortunately already retired, but you could use any leaves here. I'm using my Catherine Puller Grass Skirt ink as this is a beautiful emerald green to stamp my images. I want my clover leaves to have stamps, so I'm also stamping and die cutting the clover arrangement in the set and 3 separate single clover leaves. I want my clovers to be arranged like a bouquet, and I think it will look better with stems. I'm using all 4-leaf clovers as I'm wanting to send positive vibes with this card. Once my stamping and die cutting are done, I cut the clover arrangement apart and add glue to the smaller clovers so I can glue the larger ones on top of it. Then I arrange my clovers at the tallest point on my pattern paper. Then it's time to add my sentiment. I'm using the Honeybee Stamps Get Well Soon stamp set, which has a lot of encouragement greetings in it. I also added some sparkly embellishments to bring in a little shine and dimension. This technique is quick and easy, but really helps your pattern paper stand out while leaving enough white space to keep the card clean and modern. And that wraps up today's episode of Use Your Scraps and Pattern Paper. I hope these techniques gave you some fresh ideas on how to make the most of your pattern paper and scraps. If you enjoyed this video and found these techniques helpful and inspiring, please give this video a thumbs up and leave me a comment letting me know which technique was your favorite. If you'd like to see more ways to use your scraps, don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned for future episodes. Thanks again for spending your time with me today. Until next time, happy crafting.